Welcome to the Spirit War. My name's Beatrice, the Golden Witch, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the way that I think. I feel like I tend to take my own thought processes for granted way too easily, especially considering how differently the way I think is from other people, and in particular when it comes to my approach to language. I've talked a lot, I say a lot often, that I consider language to be authoritarian and have an innate evil behind it. To me, to speak is to cast spells. So when I call myself a witch, the way I'm looking at it is these videos, more than anything, are my witchcraft. These are the most potent spells that I am casting, is through what I say, particularly on video, because I have a certain sway in the way I present myself that I guess makes my spells work really well in that format. Typically, I create videos through personas such as Trixie the Golden Witch, which right now I expected to come out fronting in this video, but it seems I'm here to give a broader perspective on what I do, I guess. Also for the sake of voice training, because this is closer to how I think I'm trying to sound all the time. Anyways, I want to talk about spiritual warfare and about the spirit war that I perceive happening. And you can strip all of the sort of mysticism or magic from this if you want to view it through a scientific lens, but I'll tell you that science of an advanced enough level is indistinguishable from magic, and the science of the mind has not progressed far enough that we can even talk about it in like arcane terms. Like, I feel as though the development of understanding psychology, understanding how the brain works, the human brain works, is at a level of like, I don't know, understanding physics in the year 1200 or something. Like, it's just, we are impossibly low leveled at understanding psychology, which is why the terminology is constantly changing, the understandings are constantly changing, the conversation is always shifting. And I think that, like, the stuff that was happening at the top of psychology and trickling down, through the human understanding, because that's the only place where trickle down actually works, is in knowledge. It doesn't work in economics, but it does work in knowledge, where if somebody is really dedicated to aggregating as much knowledge as possible and then translating it down, there's this tertiary, knockoff effect of it. It becomes sort of less potent the further you get from the source. But as long as, you've got a wellspring somewhere. I hope this metaphor makes sense and I don't have to keep elaborating on it, because I hate when my metaphors get too complicated. It's not good witchcraft. If your metaphor is too complicated, your spell is not going to be as effective. I feel like a lot of witches think the opposite is the case. That's not true. If you can only write your spell in like super esoteric, hard to understand words, it probably means you don't understand your spell that well yourself, and you're still trying to, figure out how to do it, and involving a bunch of extra ritual that's not necessary. This is direct witchcraft. This is like, I'm going to tell you exactly what to do and you're going to do it. It's not me like fucking praying to the sun and then you get like cursed by the sun or whatever. It's like, I'm just directly correcting your spirit energy. I'm taking you and I'm setting you on the path to where you need to go spiritually. There's no middleman of like an extraterrestrial god, because the God that I believe in is the unity of everything. It is the idea that we are one superorganism, that reality is itself. To even have a concept of singularity, it must encompass all. And for there to be an all necessitates the idea of an outer nothingness outside of all, which is conceptually impossible, but also necessary for the observation of existence. And so basically, our understanding of reality is paradoxical, and it's impossible for us as humans to understand how the universe actually conceptually works because we can't conceive of nothingness. We cannot conceive of something outside of reality. Reality is an all-encompassing idea. How can there be an outside of reality? It doesn't make sense. But it's just because the way we think is twisted up in these knots of these words that have meaning to us because they allow us to understand the world in a way that lets us interact with it, but they don't have innate meaning. There is no innate meaning to be determined by us. We don't have the capacity to determine innate meaning. What we can do is use what we know to do what we think we're supposed to do. And so that subjective experience, even though subjectivity feels like very individuated, it's actually way more collective than you think because of the fact that your subjective experience is so heavily informed by being a part of the collective entity of humanity and the world itself and the universe itself. You know, all of the rules apply equally to you as they do to everybody else. You are greatly unified with other humans by the fact that there is like a minimum calorie intake to keep yourself alive that you must abide. You know, there is a certain amount of like vitamin D that if you don't have, your bones will dissolve. You know, like you have to be somewhat human to survive being human. And so there is naturally what arises consensus through, you know, what we do to survive, what we think of as good, and what, you know, progresses our own spiritual well-being as a species. Like we are after certain ideas that keep arising and arising and arising over and over again because they are the obvious conclusion to come to if somebody is under the circumstances that a human being is under. And so many of those circumstances are shared that inevitably it creates a lot of parallelism. If you go to any city in the United States, you're going to get mostly the same experience there. You know, there's little things that are different about other places because there are unique facets to being in any individual place. But what would even bring you to a place is usually the same thing. They got water, they got food. You know, there's room to farm. Like that's why humans are in a place. So there's always going to be those same essential elements no matter where you go. That stuff that arises, that is consensus, and it's the closest thing we have to a sense of objective good as a species. Now, I think it's important for people to keep trying to understand what is the consensus and is it right? Is the consensus on point? Does it need to be moved? Do we need to push consensus in a different direction? And I think that change through the consensus comes in waves where, like, you know, something spiritually is always on its way and something spiritually is always leaving. There's always a new child being born. There's always someone dying. There's always, you know, a new literal wave coming into the shore, and you know, there's a wave crashing on the shore at the same time a wave is forming in the ocean. That's always happening. And so if you think about the individual wave ending, you're just going to watch waves end forever. And if you think about the individual waves starting, you're just watching waves start forever. But if you're observing the whole process, you realize it's the same water being recycled, right? So on a spiritual level, when someone dies, that same spirit is what is being, you know, risen in the newly born. And it's not being traded in that instantaneous kind of fashion. It's actually probably traded much earlier. You know, on the genetic level, if somebody dies who had children before, they've already passed some of their spirit through those children. If they've had interactions with other people, they've already changed the way that those people think because your memories are data that gets written up into somewhere in a catalog, like a diary that's called your DNA. And that informs what comes next. And even if you don't use your own DNA to create new species, all the actions you take are affecting everyone else's DNA. You are affecting the human genome just by existing, because you are having your own interactions, or lack thereof, but which inform the collective thought, because you are always accounted for. It's very difficult to escape being accounted for, even if you really wanted to and really tried. You are born accounted for. You are immediately initiated into the experience of humanity for your own good. Again, if you don't have some level of humanity, it's going to be really hard to be human. So we tend to try to indoctrinate humans into humanity as quickly as we can and get them caught up on what we believe to be the human experience. But how right we are, how much we understand the human experience, is entirely based on perspective. It's how much do we actually know? How much did we get from our DNA? How much did we get from the people around us? How much did we get from, the collective thought on our way to then spreading information to the next person, which is something that is always happening. Again, in the same way that things are always being born and dying, I've been saying a lot lately that influence is both instantaneous and eternal. When you're influenced by something, it happens immediately. You see it and you immediately think, that's cool, or I want to do that, or why isn't that me or mine? Why didn't I think of that? And then you do. Now it's in your thoughts. And so going forward, it's always going to be there. You can't get rid of it. You can't make the influence go away once it's been in your brain. You might forget, or it might not matter as much, or it might be, overwritten by other things that are more influential, but it doesn't fully disappear. Your brain just keeps compartmentalizing things smaller and smaller into, more and more corrupted folders, compression folders that you have to unzip and unzip and unzip through these layers to get back to, but they're not gone. And they might not be the same, but they're not gone. So you've got all these corrupted files they're all corrupted on some level, but you've got all these corrupted files that are in your DNA, in your memory, that are affecting how you interact with others, and all of those interactions are creating other interactions, and it's just this endless fucking chaos of influence, of everything influencing everything all the time, everything that happens influencing everything else, butterfly effect, yada yada, rada rada, you get it. Oh, that arm got tired, and I also switched to Trixie voice at some point. I'm going to end this clip and recollect myself. I must do chi, spiritual unification, and practice Zen, whatever he was going to say before he got cut off by the other Chris saying, there's no time, I'm being chased by a real army, or whatever the fuck. This is a Garzi's wing pull. Spirit warfare. Who is at war? I think that the war is between the spiritual isolationists and spiritual collectivists. I think that there are some people whose sense of how do I protect my spirit is to keep it away from the rest of the spirit world as much as possible, because the nature of spirits is to influence one another and to collectivize, to latch. Spirits have a tendency toward mitosis. They have a tendency towards combining and then splitting again, but in a different way. Becoming something and then becoming a different thing. And whether that means through creating offspring or just through changing as people and then, going back out away from one another as different people from who you were before. There's just a tendency of souls to collapse into each other and to separate from one another as the movement of the soul collective needs, And some people Some souls feel like I need to be precious, I need to be protected, because if too much of me is drained away by becoming, more like what I see in the collective, or what's going to draw me closer into it, then I'm going to be tarnished. I'm going to become more like the worst part. Like the worst parts of it are going to infect me, basically. And the other mentality is I need to be more attuned to the collective, because the further I get away from it, the more I am tarnished. The feeling that being non-participant is what in fact tarnishes the soul. And I am on the collectivist side. I am on the side of, I think that moving away from the collective creates entropy. It creates, because there's nothing to like repower your soul. Your soul will just wither off into nothingness if it doesn't have anything to generate power through. Souls power one another collectively. They're just moving power around. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. We know this as a law of physics. Energy exists in the mind, but we don't really understand how. We don't really understand how energy moves between people, other than that there is something vibrational happening, particularly when your energy is high. You literally vibrate higher. You are on a different wavelength, and we can catch on to one another's wavelengths, and often we can keep one another on the same wavelength, and some wavelengths are more beneficial to us collectively to be on than others. So there is a lot of attunement happening in the soul collective of how do we keep the right wavelength? How do we keep the wavelength that benefits everybody the most? What is the right volume? What is the right mix? What is the right sound? What is the right level of vibration that we need to be at to do what we think species-wide we are trying to do? And there's stuff that feels good in the moment, and there's stuff that has long-term observable benefits. And I think that when you study the history of it, if you look at the history of how the soul has evolved, how the collective soul has evolved, I believe that evolution has been more rapid and more successful through collectivism than it has been through isolation. I think that isolated souls, again, tend to just die on their own and not have as much impact as they would have had if they had been a part of the collective. Now, is having the most impact necessarily like something that every soul will like survive? I do think there are souls that just get sucked right out, sucked right out of the body into the collective. They just get devoured. Some people just get crushed by collectivism. And I think that's a problem of how thirsty the souls are being left by the isolationists, who are just sucking soul out. So there's two ways to be isolationist, I should say, because some people are like, I'm just going to leave the soul system, and then they just go off and they fucking die on their own. And that's sad, but it's not like necessarily terrible for the rest of the soul collective. What is when a soul decides, I'm going to stand at the top of this thing and just drain energy from as many other souls as possible. I'm going to be the biggest soul I possibly can. I'm going to be the ultimate uber soul, and I'm going to drain all the other souls and just be all encompassing this mega soul, And every soul will feel like they're a part of the biggest soul, like then they've been absorbed into me, they'll feel like they're a part of being the biggest thing. And there's lots of souls that feel small and weak, and they just see this big light and they go rushing towards it because they say, oh, a big light, I don't want to be alone in the void, let me go to the big light. But these big lights, they just are going to suck you right in and leave you with nothing. You will just become a part of this one super soul. But it's not going to be like in the collective. It should be thought of as a bunch of souls sitting next to each other, and passing energy between them. Not one just giant soul that has absorbed all these other ones and erased the individuality of them, because basically all the other souls that could be receiving energy from one another are now being taxed to put even more energy into one another because of how many of the people around them are getting siphoned up into this fucking big thing that isn't passing the energy back. It's just collecting it, it's just sucking it all in, and it's not shooting any of it out. There is a size, there's a like a recommended soul size of a human being. There's maybe a range, like a size range that makes sense for your soul to be, and you don't need it to be the biggest soul. In fact, having a gigantic, huge, ridiculously massive soul probably going to kill lots of other souls. Lots of other souls that could have had a decent shot at a moderate sized existence are just getting swallowed up into this thing. And then when that balloon pops, then hopefully the energy makes it back out into other people. But what tends to happen is that those big, huge soul balloons, they get so fucking heavy and dense that they just sink down way below the collective and they explode somewhere underground. And then that energy is just lost. It just dissipates into nothingness. Whereas sometimes there are souls that are just like born massive. Like a massive amount of energy just arrives. And like it doesn't absorb other souls, but just sits with them and shares its massive amount of, warmth and just grows other souls around it. Just becomes like a growth pool. And this is sort of ideal, is that, there is like, it's not a problem for there to be a big soul that's giving energy out constantly, if it's got all this energy and it just slowly lets it all out until it's gone. At some point, everyone dies. And when that soul finally pops, the things that are closest to it will catch a whole lot of it. And the shrapnel will sort of fly off into other, neighboring soul realms. This is starting to be so visual in my mind that it's hard for me to know if I'm still communicating something that is understandable. But also my arm's starting to hurt again. I think sometimes we catch like an unsustainable amount of a specific soul. Like, for instance, I think the biggest soul I've ever encountered, the biggest soul that I know of, is the soul of Osamu Tezuka. The soul of Osamu Tezuka loomed so ridiculously massive, and it was in part because he was just draining everyone else's soul that he could get his hands on, but he was also redistributing that energy in a chaotic fashion constantly. So basically, he ended up being just this throughput for a stupefying amount of soul, just crazy amounts of it flowing through him into other people. So you get, for instance, Akira Toriyama catches a massive, massive chunk of Osamu Tezuka's soul while he's still a kid. Because Tezuka's just giving that soul energy out fucking flippantly all over the place. So Toriyama's got this big old chunk of soul that he just got dropped on him right from Tezuka. He goes and makes Dragon Ball. And through Dragon Ball, he's pouring out this Tezuka energy that he's been left with, just continually. And he's still getting energy from other places, of course. But it's like that inexhaustibility, like the inability to like stop, to ever just quit working long enough to not like die about it. I think when you get Tezuka's soul, and I have a big chunk of it, not nearly the size of Toriyama's chunk, but I did receive a large chunk of the soul of Tezuka, and I didn't receive it directly. He died before I was even born. He had no way to distribute soul to me directly. But I've got tertiary Tezuka soul because, again, he poured it so much into everything. So I've got all this Tezuka hand-me-down influence from Toriyama, from the people who made Pokemon, from, you know, all of anime and manga history, really, like whatever, anybody who's ever been influenced by Tezuka, which is basically everyone. And I've consumed a tremendous amount of anime and manga. So like I've received these bits and pieces and scraps of Tezuka Soul from all over this industry, you know, and I've poured a lot of that out myself. You know, I've continually Tezuka Soul is dense and hard to have on you. So I try to pass it forward in the most direct terms I can, like literally talking about him and his story, and particularly how I see his spirit. Because you can talk about Tezuka's work in more literal terms of like what's on the page, but what intrigues me about his work is how it all says the same things about him. Like every single fucking thing he ever drew was practically the exact same thing. And the more Tezuka manga you read, the more you're just like, this guy had like 3 ideas, you know, and he wrote them literally 1,000 times. So like when you start feeling the shape of Tezuka's soul, you start to see that it was, for its time, a very unique soul. Like the reason he had so much soul energy is that he was the first pure child of media, like the first person ever in history to just like spend all of their time consuming media, because he was constantly at the theater, either the movie theater or the Takarazuka theater, and reading manga every weekend because his dad was bringing home magazines, the first time that was ever possible. So literally the first otaku was Osamu Tezuka. And when he was like 18 and just starting medical school, Japan got nuked, and like a significant amount of the population of the country was erased. So that left a whole ton of unsettled soul, of which Osamu Tezuka personally collected a fuckload. Obviously, a lot of other Japanese people collected, and people around the world collected some of that soul. But Tezuka collected a lot of World War II soul and just continually poured it forward for the rest of his life, until he died from overtaxing himself for like 40 straight years. Now, I don't want to die like Tezuka, and I have a workaholic mentality. I idolized Andrew Hussey for a time in my 20s, who had described himself as not really somebody who does a work of art so much as a lifestyle of art. And I really tried to mimic that at a time when I felt so insecure about myself that I just didn't know how to participate in society. You know, the only thing I understood was, well, I could keep making stuff, you know, but I didn't even really know how to make stuff that's about anything anyone understands, because the only thing I understood was myself. And I felt like I was too different from other people to really make sense to anybody, until I started finding the connection points through talking about myself so much that, you know, eventually somebody's going to say, hey, wait, that part's like me. And then I can kind of start decoding, well, why is that? Why is that something we both share, but this other thing isn't? And then breaking down what are the similarities and differences between myself and other people that join us. Where am I correct and where am I incorrect? You know, where am I normal in my thinking and where am I like being selfish, you know? And the more study and science that I consume, the more I understand not only what is evidentially true, but also what is evidentially true that we can't explain. You know, like how much of the psychology aspect might as well be considered as spiritualism, because of the fact that like we are affected by everything in the mind. Everything your senses intake affects your mind. And the detailed, complicated ways that is the case, like actually decoding that is what psychology is. But it's like nascent as a science, you know? It's like not there. It's not there at a level that you can talk about how to do it effectively in scientific terms. You cannot talk about how to live a spiritually effective life in scientific terms. You can, however, do it in spiritual and psychological terms. You can talk about how to mediate boundaries. You can, which is essentially spirit science. Like, let's get real. Well, not spirit science like the one Munchie lectured about. I'm talking about the actual science of the spirit, is like, how do you manage your energy levels and your vibrational levels with the people around you so that they're not stealing your energy without giving you anything back? How do you create reciprocal energy cycles where you are capable of drawing on something together? For instance, here's an example. Something that gave me a lot of energy just yesterday. My friend Krona and I watched Across the Spider-Verse together. So, Across the Spider-Verse, phenomenal film. Obviously, a tremendous amount of energy went into creating that film. Was all of that energy redistributed accurately through the people who actually worked on the film? I don't think so, because there are people who have reported that this film was a vampire on their life, that they had to do crunch, they were overworked for the amount of pay they had to do. And I absolutely believe that's probably true because it's been true on every animated thing ever. And also Sony is the producer. So I would never, ever trust Sony. I would never work for Sony. I would never do anything for Sony. I simply steal their product and thank them. Yubba dub dub. Thanks for the grub. Sorry for your loss, everybody who actually made this good. But, you're making a deal with the devil when you work with Sony. But what a deal with the devil grants you is the ability to spread your message widely. The devil takes a big chunk of your soul and he redistributes it. So the devil is kind of communist and a good guy, which is why, devil men rule. But yeah, so basically making a deal with the devil is just like having a chunk of your soul sliced off and given away, and it will kind of make you a hero if people recognize what you've done, that you've made a sacrifice for them. But if you try to be like, oh, well, it was just natural, people are just going to be like, oh, well, all right, thanks, and then they're not going to ever think you need anything. So you have to kind of be needy in the spiritual economy. You have to make your needs known. If you are feeling spiritually weak, if you don't have enough vibration, don't have enough energy, you have to open up the passage for it to come through. You have to signal the other souls. You have to bring something forward. You have to call it from the ether. I'm good at doing this through lyricism and through making videos. Like, I'm good at call to action. I'm not good at being seen. Like, I spend a lot of time indoors. There are people, normal people, who just, it doesn't occur to them that feeling sad means that they shouldn't go about their daily business because they are so used to doing that daily business. And so when they show up to their daily business, someone will tell them, hey, you seem sad. Are you okay? And they will interrogate that and maybe even send them home to have some alone time if it's something that seems necessary for them. But there's people like me whose natural state is being alone. And so it's not often that I would arrive somewhere and somebody would be able to identify my emotional state because they're not used to seeing me. They don't know what it would look like if I was sad versus if I was happy, unless they've been around me long enough. And at this point, there's only a couple of people who I think, know me well enough to identify me on an emotional level like that. So, like, where I get more of my needs met on an energy level is through, again, deliberate calls to action. And sometimes I can't bring myself to make that call, which will leave me in a struggle, And so I've been trying to surround myself with people who will check in on me and make sure that I have that energy, because I might have so little that I can't even raise the signal flags. I might have so little energy that I can't even let you know that I have so little energy. So I want there to be people who are making sure, who are like, hey, wait a minute, I haven't heard from Trixie. I wonder if that means she's got too little energy. Let's pass some over there and see what happens, you know? It could be that I actually have a ton of energy, but I'm working it into like a big old spirit bomb that I'm about to throw at somebody, you know, either for positive or for negative effect. But I do think that there is an aspect of warfare in deciding where you put the energy, right? Because again, the super souls, they're just trying to draw as much energy in as possible, and they're pretty good at getting little bits of it off of you. Like, it's pretty easy for a super soul to just kind of swing through your neck of the woods and just nip little bits of energy off of you, even if you don't notice it's happening. They'll just, you know, the magnetism from a super soul is heavy. I've got, for instance, right here, this is an Amazon Alexa device. It's not mine, it's Shade's, but it hangs out in the kitchen, right? Now, I've gotten my usefulness out of this because it's hooked up to his Amazon Music or whatever, so I can play songs that I like off of it, and that's cool. It does give me energy, it does give me vibration, but that thing also will randomly show up like news articles or ads and shit. And sometimes I see it, and that's the first time I saw news that day. You know, like, I don't consume news. I stay away from it. I think it's mind poison. But I'll walk over to the Alexa, and it'll tell me some shit about current events, and then a thought pops into my head. And usually that thought is immediately followed by, God damn it, you son of a bitch, you got me again. And then I stop thinking about it. But the fact that it even got me in the first place really bothers me, you know, because it just shows that Amazon is so fucking big that it's always floating next to you. It's almost impossible to be in the human experience and not have little bits of your soul getting nipped away by Amazon, you know? Similarly with other gigantic souls. I am practically in Google. You know, like the super alphabet soul, the Googleplex soul. I every time I call it alphabet, somebody thinks I'm talking about being LGBT, and I might be, because it's possible that Google has just owned every soul in the alphabet soup, but I don't have the metrics on this, all right? I don't know, I don't have enough perspective to look at super souls from a top-down angle, you know? I just see them passing by and go, well, that's a big fucking boat. That is a big fucking boat. Wow, that's a big fucking boat. I wonder how much energy it takes to compel that boat to move an inch. Probably a lot of fucking energy. I hope it's not going to take all of my energy and actually, like, you know, like moving that thing an inch probably just burned like a whole village of small souls somewhere, you know, like, you know that thing, you know, it's a big fucking boat. Anyway, the hope is that you can get, like, the souls to a level where they can't simply be absorbed like that. You know, like, first of all, don't let super souls exist that can just sap up whole fucking villages. And second of all, don't let there be whole fucking villages that are so weak of spirit that they can just be sapped up into other ones, you know? Again, there is, like, an optimal range of spirit power that everyone should be at. And I think that, for the most part, people understand how spiritually well they are at a given moment. And I think a lot of my audience is suffering spiritually in ways that I am best suited to help with. Like, I think that that's what my content is best for, is its ability to help you through this spiritual puzzle paradox we've been placed into, because I am at peace with it. Like, I feel as though maybe I just feel like my soul is sustainable because I've got it to where, you know, I created something that is, it started off small. Like, my soul started off really small and alone. And I had to float very slowly closer to, like, the more marginal big souls, and then work my way into sort of the safer collective range. But then I'm also realizing that, like, the tremendous majority of all soul has been collected either into super souls or into like, these huge collective pockets of small, heavily drained souls that are like barely clinging to life. And the like range of souls that are just like, freely distributing energy and feeling safe and secure in where they are in the soul matrix and its slow, development. And again, the point of it is not to make all of the souls grow bigger over time or anything like that. It is to keep a motion, to keep a constant flow of energy through the soul matrix. There's a natural passage of time where a soul will eventually fade out and all of its energy will have been distributed. But ideally, none of it was just lost. You don't want soul energy just falling out through the world. Usually that happens because one of those big super souls just sinks and then all the energy's gone. And it's like, well, you took all of it and you did nothing with it, Okay. I feel like this analogy has gotten strained as far as I can possibly take it. Hopefully this made some kind of sense. Welcome to the Spirit War. Cut to the part where I shout out all of the sponsors. All right, shout out to my members. Night Night, Asapi, Taperclip, Gassy Hall, Duncan264, Zen Huxtable, Zerakiel, Gigadonk, Gary Always, NMA Rufus, VigRox67, Z-Cypher, Brody, Denakori, Towelcat, ASE Presents, Plague on Humanity, Yakuman, CC, Your Stuff is Cool, Spacey Filmer, Elaine, commenter number 456, Poopy Doopy, Just Anna, Yodiland Wizard, Oh My Guy, Aqua Bunny, The Mr. Grafixable, Spectral, Isabel Incorporated, Mayday from Space, Kudere-kun, Sister of Scarlet, Pika Pika 2000, Petrichor VT, Max Potion TCG, Babagadusius, Brianna W, The Rabbit, and that's all of them. I almost accidentally read the word member at the top of this document. Thank you all! And I'll see you in the next one soon.